everybody. I have Glenn with me today, and we're going to be talking about the journey of digital transformation and maybe breaking it down in a little easier terms than is typically done. But before we dive into the questions that I have for you, Glenn, can you give everybody an introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone. It is great to be with you all today. My name is Glenn Gibson. I am the Director, Global Technology Evangelist at Hyland. So really I get the opportunity to talk about Hyland and our technologies for a job, which is awesome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me. And as I teased a little bit earlier, I'm going to start with just a level setting question, and I'm going to challenge you a little to give us a definition for digital transformation that doesn't use any of our industry terms, just like let's break it down in normal human language.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm like so tempted to start talking about content services and digital process automation and all of these industry jargons that go along with it. But I think there really is a simple way to think about digital transformation. And it's really when we think about what digital transformation is going to achieve for the organization. And it's this. And it sounds simple, but there's a lot of weight around this phrase. It's the ability to provide a complete view of the right information to the right people at the right time. That, to me, is really what digital transformation is all about achieving.
And it does sound simple when you put it that way. So I think there's some more layers that maybe we'll get into diving into here in a second. And I'll give you a pass for using content services at the beginning. But when we take a look at digital transformation, I think one thing that's interesting about that term is it kind of makes it sound like there is a beginning and an end. So I guess how do we go about plotting out that journey of transformation?
Right, exactly. So let's maybe talk about the antithesis of having a complete view of the right information for the right people at the right time, because clearly, and we'll just go all the way to one end of the spectrum here, paper-based businesses find it really difficult to give their employees or the people outside the organization such a real-time instant view into the work or the transactions or the tasks or the conversations that they're doing. So clearly, when we talk digitization, one of those big rocks and hurdles that every organization needs to be on this continuous mindset of is to try to drive paper out of their business processes. And that can take all sorts of forms. So that's not just scanning documents that we get sent to us. That's also looking at the forms that we provide and making those digitally accessible in the first place. And then beyond that, when we look across the kind of spectrum of content too, it's identifying content which is digital in nature, yes, so emails and chat strings and all the different things that's out there, but then being able to figure out which of those are relevant to the business and then being able to make sure that those are applied to all the pieces too. So on one end of the spectrum, this idea of transformation obviously has an element of digitization of content and other parts of the processes in there too, and then it kind of spans from there. So that's part of the question. I've got lots to say, but I'll pause there for a second, see if you've got any other probing questions for me.
No, I like the way that you mentioned that there's kind of two sides to this, and that there is a level of digitization, but digitization is different than digital transformation. And that's something that I talk a lot about, is you have to have that base and that level of prioritization that you can build on over time. And you can't go all the way to AI and machine learning and all of these fancy tools that we have available to us today if you're still working with mostly unstructured content and paper within the organization. So keep going from there. I'm right alongside you.
The way I was kind of thinking through this recently in this journey of transformation is that there are mile markers that you could recognize as an organization that you would kind of pass. And as you make progress in those, they kind of build on each other. So I mentioned this idea of paper-based processes. So in this COVID world that we live in, those paper-based processes are not just slow and expensive, but also carry a health risk too. And organizations, what we found over last year is that this concept of digital transformation really added fuel to the fire of a lot of these initiatives that were underway, because they had no choice but to figure out new ways, digital ways, for employees to interact with each other, and for the people that the organization serves to be able to interact with them as well. And people came up with all sorts of, very like overnight transformation projects just to survive what was going on. So paper-based processes, that's one mile marker. Another one, which is, a symptom of the need to continually look to transform, is when we see employees spending a lot of time searching in multiple applications or systems just for the information that they need to do one thing. And that's often when we ask organizations, when you look at a single task or a single set of information around a customer or a patient or a student or a constituent or a vendor or an agent or whoever that might be, where is all that stuff? And that is often an opportunity there to think, well, part of this digital transformation, it's not about getting all that stuff into one repository. That is not the goal. The idea, though, is to provide a complete view of all the related information in a single interface. And that can involve elegant integrations. It can involve, just all different technologies in order to present what's relevant at that moment for someone. So those are just two. We've got more, but I'm going to pause there.
I like that you mentioned the idea the goal isn't necessarily to have everything living in one spot, but to find a way to get that information to people to drive decisions. Because I think it would be a silly errand or goose chase, I guess, to go try and find all of your information and get it into one place. There's so many, even working for a relatively small organization, the amount of areas that I have information to try and pull that all into one spot. And we use Zombies. We have that, we've got a central location for our information, but I can't imagine trying to get everything into one application. So I think that's a really critical thing. You don't need to have that as a part of your journey to be successful, but you do need to think about how you're presenting that information.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And email is another interesting one to throw into that mix. And for organizations that are looking through this, they don't have to try to solve everything at one time. But you take email as a great example. Everyone has their own email inbox, and then there might be a departmental email inbox, etc. Loads of the email that a person might manage, say a customer service rep, is just, there's no long-term residual value to a lot of their kind of individual correspondence between staff or whatever. But there are some of those that come into the organization which are. It might be a customer complaint. It might be a piece of correspondence which directly relates to an investigation or something like that. So how does it get from someone's inbox into a managed part of the business process as elegantly, as seamlessly as possible? How is that identified as being relevant? And then how is it going to get in there? Because without, and this is just such a one-note example, but it's worth kind of talking about, without any really good tools, does someone save an email as a .msg file to their desktop and then drag it in and or convert it to a PDF and drag it in? If that's the way it happens, it's just, the reality is it's never going to get stored in or managed in a relevant place. So it's just looking at specific areas where there's an issue, where there's information in a silo or whatever, and then looking for technologies around those is a good one.
And I think that idea of making it as seamless and easy as possible for the person that's in the center of it is something that is so critical. A lot of times when we think of digital transformation, we talk about making our customer experience as seamless as possible. But I think a big, big part of what we need to be focusing on is the employee experience and how to make that as effortless. And obviously they're going to have effort involved in their job, but making all of the noise around them go away so that they can focus on the decisions instead of the silly onesie-twosie steps in between.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the symptoms that you mentioned there too, for those outside the organization, it's whether and you can ask the question, do the people that you serve have a complete instant view into their relationship with you and to their latest transaction or question or order or whatever that might be? And if anytime someone needs to pick up a phone just to ask a set of basic questions, where the information is already, it resides digitally somewhere, can we close that gap so that they can have a lot more self-service options to be able to work with you without having to kind of go through those areas. So that's another, I love how you mentioned that. It's a real balancing act between the internal people and the external people as well. And really, they both need the same thing. They both need a view of the right information exactly where they need it.
Great. So one thing that I want to explore a little bit more with you, unless we've got more points that we want to talk about going through.
Well, ask your question and we'll see.
Well, my last question for you is really centered around this idea of, do we have a set endpoint for digital transformation? Because we're talking about posts along the way and markers of how we plot that journey. But when we take a look at it, is there really ever a solid end game in sight as technology continues to change and processes and the way that we interact with that technology evolves? Is there really an endpoint for this journey, or are we going to continually find new posts to put up along the way?
Yeah, I think this will be a continuum of continuous improvement that stretches on in perpetuity forever, for sure, because technology is constantly evolving and changing, and there's new ways that kind of hit the market that become really viable. There's new expectations that happen on the side of employees and the people that we serve to embrace. So I think the continuum is out there, but I do have in mind a way to articulate whether we are kind of reaching a good plateau, perhaps, for the types of things that we're trying to do. And the phrase is really this. It's this idea of digital operations and digital experiences. So if we can truly say that our operations are fully digital and that we have fully interactive digital experiences, which all ultimately provide everyone who needs it, that our organization touches, a complete view of the right information at the right time. If we're accomplishing that across all the major areas of our organization, then we are well on our way with our transformation journeys. And maybe, that it's not really a matter of transformation anymore, but it's a matter of continuously driving optimization through those digital operations and those digital experiences. So to me, that's kind of the touch point, is to really not think about, really focus on the journey, but when we start, like the classic start with the end in mind, if that's the goal, and the goal is to provide that complete view, we can plot ourselves where we are in there and how much room that we have to go. And then there's a point where we're delivering value and, we don't maybe need to make a lot of operational changes, but just make sure that we are continuing to propel that forward.
And I like that you mentioned the continuum of continuous improvement as we're talking about breaking this down as easily as possible. But one thing that I like to talk a lot about with digital transformation, kind of going back to a comment that you made at the beginning of our conversation, is this idea of digitization versus digital transformation. And I think the thought process of continued improvement and optimization is inherently critical to the idea of digital transformation as opposed to digitization, because that transformation is never fully done. It's almost like if you're becoming a runner, you don't all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm done, I'm a runner, I'm done with this, that the transformation is done. You continue to try and improve your time and get better, but you've reached the destination of becoming that runner in your mind. And I feel like it's the same idea. It's this cultural shift within your organization that maybe we're done with our transformation, but we're always seeking to be better, and we've got this cultural shift towards continuous improvement. And I'm speaking the same language.
I totally agree with you. I think what's interesting is you're identifying a potential red herring, if that's the right expression, for organizations, because there might be an impression that just because we have now digitized our unstructured content, that digital transformation has occurred. But that is a necessary step, but that is just one tiny part of digital transformation. It really is looking holistically across the whole organization. And perhaps I can jump then to the other end of that spectrum that you mentioned. So once this transformation is up and running and we are making a lot of progress, we cannot rest on our laurels, so to speak. We have to continue to approach the organization with this mindset of what we're trying to achieve, because cloud-based subscription software that departments are able to subscribe to is more readily available today than it ever has been and will continue to be the case. Now, that can be a great thing for a department to be able to go pay for a quick subscription and be able to start accomplishing something a bit more quickly as a specific department. But if that goes unmanaged across the whole organization and there becomes an explosion of disconnected cloud-based apps where organizationally relevant information and content is now being stored in disconnected systems all over the place, that then is going to perpetuate and cause bigger issues further down the line, because somehow, somewhere, that is now starting to get in the way and blocking out this idea of providing a complete view of information. Because now these silos, it's not talking about internal repositories now these silos are popping up across all these different cloud-based applications. So kind of IT leaders have to be able to keep a handle on that. And the expression which came out a couple of years ago now is shadow IT, where departments start making independent decisions. That can be a great thing as long as it's part of a cohesive strategy to ensure there's an elegant information architecture under the cover. So that was just a little kind of riff on that one too.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you joining me to talk through this idea of the ever-changing journey and helping break down the conversation a little bit more into really attainable thought processes of the right information to the right people at the right time. That makes it really simple, and if you start driving towards that goal, it makes it a little bit more attainable than this big umbrella of digital transformation. So
yeah, what I love about that is being able to take one team or one person at a time and get some wins there. Sorry, you're on a roll.
No, you're just fine. Well, I wanted to thank you for your time and encourage anybody that wants to connect with Glenn to make your way over to his LinkedIn, and also reach out to him or anyone at Hyland or Naviant to learn a little bit more about how these processes are working and how we might be able to help you accomplish your goals. But thank you so much for joining me, Glenn, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much, Emma. Thanks, everyone.
If you're looking for expert tips on how to get started with your transformation or looking to hone in on your approach, make sure that you subscribe to our channel to catch our weekly Digital Transformation Talk series, where we interview experts from around the world on how to make it happen.